We've had a lot of questions the last few days, especially this morning, about what the effect of the longshoremen strike on the East Coast going to have on Azure and your food. And so I will give it my best shot. Hey, there's no saying, obviously, how long this will last, or and the longer it lasts, the more the implications are. So, by shutting down the import into the whole East Coast, that is going to basically dry up all the international trade, both directions, for the about half of the freight that comes into the United States. Maybe not quite, but pretty close. Which obviously we already have supply chain shortages as far as getting and making sure that we have enough supplies coming in from around the world and going out. So the ports are already extra busy. We had a lot of stress on them right after COVID when they shut down for just a short period of time during COVID. It took months and months to catch up. And what happens when the ships can't be unloaded on time, the ships are sitting out in the ocean waiting to be unloaded. While they're sitting out in the ocean waiting to be unloaded, they're not hauling any freight from any port from around the world. So there are fewer ships available to haul the freight. So the price goes up. So the price of freight international will go up substantially the longer this goes on. And even though most of the freight for Azure comes into the West Coast, which it doesn't sound like will be affected by this strike directly, my guess is that a lot of the freight that is normally destined for the Gulf Coast will get rerouted to come into the West Coast and will overload the West Coast ports. And they have a finite amount of capacity. And so the more, you know, they will have to put these ships in line coming in. So the bottom line is the longer this goes up, the more that it will affect food prices as far as anything that's imported for sure. But it will definitely even affect to some degree the domestic freight, because now if it's coming into the West Coast and they're having to haul it by truck all the way across to the East Coast, it's going to tie up a lot more trucks as well. So it will increase the price of domestic freight as well, just, for what it's worth. Will that affect your bottom line food prices? Absolutely, it will. How much? Probably depends on, how long this goes on. It may, hey, if this goes on for a very short period of time, maybe not a whole lot. If this goes on for months, it could drive food prices up substantially, both domestic and international food prices. We could be talking, international stuff, 10, 15, 20%. Domestic may, somewhat less. Um, but freight, depending on what it is, does play um, into that pretty heavily. Will there be shortages at Azure? That's the other thing that comes up. There are definitely a few things that come from overseas that I wouldn't be surprised, you know, if get delayed enough that Azure could run out. Obviously, things from the East Coast would be most heavily affected. Things like Italian pastas, Bionatori brand type stuff. Some of the semolina pastas are from Italy. Olive oil is from the Mediterranean. Um, some of the, olives and that kind of thing. Um, And then West Coast, which would be affected a little bit less, but could be delayed. Things like coconut products, coconut oil, coconut sugar, shredded coconut, um, coconut milks. Those are all things that come into the ports on the West Coast, um, as well as things like, chocolates, some of the, nuts like cashews, Brazil nuts, um, some of the um, Himalayan salt, some of the imported rices. Those could all be things that are affected, um, or delayed, I should say, delayed more than completely not able to be here. So, hey, will we survive? Yeah, we'll survive. We'll have food to sell. But there definitely will be implications from a longshoreman strike on the East Coast that would be maybe a little bit more than what you just think of for a West Coast company. So, you know, plan ahead. We won't go hungry, but we may, there may be a few things that are a little bit hard to get.